Many years ago, my wife and I adopted a purebred tennis hound. Her name was Sophia. Yep, that's right, a purebred tennis hound. Now, of course, when we adopted Sophie as a 6-week-old mixed breed puppy of uncertain parentage, we didn't know that that's what she was. That would only become apparent later. Shortly after adopting Sophie, we moved to Chicago and our apartment was near a public tennis court. We'd go on walks and frequently Sophie would dash into the bushes and come out with her prize, a tennis ball. Now, of course, based on where we were walking, this wasn't all that surprising. But what was surprising was what happened when we walked in other neighborhoods without tennis courts. Somehow, some way, almost invariably, Sophie would find a tennis ball. We'd just be walking along and suddenly she'd bolt into the bushes and out she'd come and there'd be a ball. Other times we just looked down and noticed that she already had one in her mouth. When did that happen? Where did that come from? People used to stop us and say, "What a cute puppy. What kind of dog is that?" Say, "This is Sophia. She is a purebred tennis hound." This got me thinking. How much of her behavior was innate? How much of it was preference? Did she just like to find tennis balls, or did she have to? Many years later, we moved here to Maryland and we bought a house out in the woods. By this time, Sophie is an old girl. She's nearly blind, she's nearly deaf, and she's quite arthritic. The day that we came to our new home, we opened the car door and let her out to go into the woods and take care of her business. She kind of hobbled off, and a few minutes later, she came back. Yep, you guessed it. She found a tennis ball. Some old, moldy, disgusting, prehistoric, ancient thing that had been sitting out in the woods since the beginning of time. Clearly, Sophie was a purebred tennis hound. But more importantly, finding tennis balls wasn't just something that she liked to do, it was something that she had to do. She could not find tennis balls. Now, perhaps it's because I'm trained as a scientist, or maybe it's just the way that I am, but when I look at things, I sometimes see things a little bit differently, and I ask questions. One day I was looking out my window, and I saw a peregrine falcon attack a pigeon. The pigeon had just been flying along, minding its own business, when out of nowhere the falcon attacked. I thought that the pigeon was doomed, but this was not to be the case. While the falcon was larger and faster, the pigeon was more nimble, and at the last possible moment, the pigeon ducked and dove, evading the attack. The falcon needed time and space to turn and resume pursuit. This battle kind of repeated itself for a while until eventually both birds disappeared behind a building. Let's think about this question. Do birds have any idea of how good they are at flying, or is this just something that they do? A friend of mine knows the sorts of things that interest me, and he sent me this link to a YouTube video with a short message. Amazing video, you have to see it to believe it. The video documents one of the great underwater migrations, the South African Sardine Run. During this event, billions of sardines come to the South African coast to spawn. Driven by such an enormous bounty, the predator, it's just a feeding frenzy, and the sardines form these dense clouds called bait balls. And within these balls, the sardines move as with a single mind, evading the predators as best they can. Now, as the case with the falcon and the pigeon, the predators and the sardines are pretty well matched. The predators are stronger and faster, the sardines more nimble. What do you think? Do the fish have any idea of how good they are at swimming, or is this just something that they do? Now, all of this has gotten me wondering about the nature of certain hardwired behaviors. In the case of the birds and the fish, whether or not they have awareness of how good they are at what they do seems irrelevant. These behaviors are a must. Failure to do them would result in either becoming food or failing to feed. But was this the case with Sophia and her tennis balls? And here's the main point. Might these observations also apply to people? Are there certain things that we just do? Are there certain behaviors that we cannot not do? This past summer, my wife and I were vacationing in Sonoma with some friends, and this one particular evening we got invited back to the home of a local winemaker. During the course of the evening, we discussed a wide range of subjects, and Scott, the winemaker, had enjoyed an eclectic career and was interested in a lot of different things. He had started out initially in veterinary school, but then switched and became an architect. Eventually became partner with the firm, but then decided, I think what I really want to do is make wine. I assumed that he just liked challenges. But then I started to think about Sophie and her tennis balls, and the birds and the fish, and that none of them likely had any idea of how good they were at what they did. So I asked Scott, birds fly, fish swim. What do you do? What is it that you cannot not do? Without missing a bit, his face lights up with this big smile, and he says, Jeff, I make messes and then I clean them up. I make messes and then I clean them up. I love this response, and I love it for a couple of reasons. First, it came so quickly, so naturally, it just smacks of authenticity and self-awareness. Secondly, I believe that it also starts to provide some insight into the man. Now, while I met Scott for the first time that evening, I had already started to feel that I had some understanding of what drove him. But with his response, it crystallized this image in my mind. I was able to see him simultaneously as both a disruptive as well as a creative force. He liked to upset the apple cart, but only then to find creative solutions. I found this just fascinating. But so what? Who cares? Why should this matter? During the course of my career, I've had the privilege and honor to have been able to lead many different teams and businesses. One of the responsibilities, or perhaps the responsibility that I find simultaneously the most rewarding, the most challenging, is the hiring of people and their mentoring. Early on, I used to believe that finding a good technical fit as well as a cultural fit was the most important thing. And today, while I believe that's still important, I find something else that I believe is more important. And that is to find someone that'll blossom, grow, and be wildly successful in the role. That's it. But of course, with most things of value, saying it is a whole lot easier than achieving it. In fact, it is really, really hard. Now, the general hiring process is probably familiar to most of you. It starts with a job description, outline of core responsibilities, technical requirements, education necessary for the role. Job gets posted, phone screens, resume review. And this will hopefully result in a small handful of candidates. These individuals are brought in and they meet with members of my team who are going to evaluate them largely on their technical skills as well as the cultural fit. But for me, I remain focused on that singular objective, trying to find someone that'll blossom, grow, and be very successful in that role. At some point during my time with the candidate, I would usually ask them, birds fly, fish swim. What do you do? What is it that you cannot not do? And then I sit back and I watch their facial expressions. I watch their body language. Oftentimes, the candidate will kind of drift off and search for an appropriate memory, and then when I'm lucky, there's a flash of recognition and surprise, and they'll say, what I do is I connect with people. And then I follow up with, after they say what they do, I follow up with, many of these things become hardwired during childhood. Can you give me an example of when you were a child and you exhibited this behavior? Now, I remember coming home from school, getting off my bus, but instead of going home, I went to the city bus stop that was near my house. I used to greet people and ask them how their day was. This seemed to cheer them up and make them happy. I had another candidate that said, I just have to organize. everything has to be in its place. And then in response to my follow-up, my father was a drill sergeant in the Army. I had one chore before going to school in the morning, and that was to make my bed. This one day, I had to go to school when I overslept, and I had to rush to catch my bus. Didn't have time to make my bed. That day when I got home, my father was waiting for me in my bedroom. He talked to me and said, you know, everything has a purpose and a place. And the bed's purpose and place is to be prepared and ready for sleep. He told me how disappointed he was in me that I had failed to help the bed to achieve its purpose. To this day, I try very hard to make sure that everything is in its place and is ready to serve its purpose. Now, these two examples that I just gave were for roles that I currently have in my organization, and these are for people that are actually based in hospitals across the country, and their role is to primarily approach cancer patients and ask them if they'd be willing to participate in a research study. The responsibilities of the role include both patient-facing as well as record-keeping and data entry. So now thinking about these two stories, you know, what do you think? Do those two responses seem authentic to you? Can you imagine them blossoming, growing, and being successful in the role? Do you think they might take different approaches but still be very successful? Another time, I was hiring a manager for one of my groups. Managed to narrow things down to two finalists. Both were asked, birds fly, fish swim, what do you do? Now, because of the nature of the position, it wasn't really surprising that both responded with, I lead. And then on to my follow-up with them, the first candidate said, well, in 5th grade, I was captain of the baseball team. Second candidate responded with, you know, I can't really explain it. I don't know. I just remember being on the playground and the other kids coming around and wanting to know what sorts of games to play and want to know my opinion on things. It's just, that's the way things have been for me. So what do you think? Do those responses seem authentic? How do you think those individuals might approach leading their groups? So again, why does any of this matter? It's in my experience that the people that have the greatest self-awareness, that have the best understanding of that which they cannot not do, also understand how best to leverage those behaviors to their greatest advantage. It's my responsibility to try to match those behaviors with the appropriate roles and help the person unleash those behaviors. In the right environment, it's these people that tend to blossom, grow, and succeed. And so I leave you with birds fly, fish swim. What do you do? Thank you.